everyone. Welcome to Tea Time. I'll be your host today. My name is Michelle Talamo. We have a very exciting program for you. It's a tape performance, a lecture, in fact, by Brian Mauro. He's a national security expert, and he spoke to our membership at NJTeaPartyCoalition, our general meeting, and he informed us on the radical Islamic threat in the globe, in New Jersey, and in the U.S. So we'd like to have that for you tonight. And to give you a little background on Ryan Mauro, he's with the Clarion Project, and they've produced some outstanding films like Obsession, Iranium, and the very newest one, which is Honor Diaries, about Islamic Sharia law and the effect on women. And that's pretty enlightening, to say the least. Now, Ryan Mauro has done major research, and it's been, actually his analysis has been on FrontPage Magazine, PJ Media, and the peer review called Middle East Quarterly. He's also a consultant to law enforcement, congressional members, and he has also consulted with the military. So he is quite authoritative, and he is very fact-based in his findings. And I'm sure you'll find this episode to be quite enlightening. So sit back, listen to what he has to say, and then we'll return to you. Thank you.
And basically the objective of the website is not just to report what you can get on Fox News, on MSNBC, or anywhere else. We want to break away from the 3-minute news segment culture that we're currently in and dive deeper so that we can have a more complex, more comprehensive, and ultimately more truthful understanding of everything that's going on in relation to Islamic extremism. Towards the back there, we have the DVDs for sale that were developed by the Clarion Project. Like we said, the first one is Obsession. That's the one that has been viewed the most. It's been viewed by tens of millions of people. It was showed on CNN and Fox News back in around 2008. And it really, I think, permanently changed this country into understanding the ideology behind Islamic extremism. Still, the majority of people don't understand it, but of those that do, the majority of them have seen that film. So that's an excellent film. The second film that we have in the back is The Third Jihad. That's all about the stealth jihad that's happening in the United States. Not just the violent elements, but also the non-violent elements, including how they influence government policy in a direction that they wish. And you're seeing that very evident today. The third film, the one that you're going to be watching on Thursday, is Iranium. That's been officially condemned by the Iranian government, so you know that it's good. And although a lot of it focuses on Iranian President Ahmadinejad in terms of the news clips, we have to understand that he was always just a figurehead. The president of Iran is not the supreme leader. The supreme leader is essentially the dictator, the theocrat that runs Iran. He's still in power, so they've changed their face. They've done a PR makeover, so Ahmadinejad's not in power anymore, but really nothing has changed, and so the film remains as relevant as ever. Our most recent film is Honor Diaries. You might have heard about the controversy where some of these radical Islamic groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations were criticizing it. It's all about the struggle for women's rights in the Muslim world, not just in the Muslim world overseas, but also here in Muslim American society. Megyn Kelly's show talked about it, I think, 5 nights in a row. So it's gotten a lot of press, and that's also available in the back for you. If you go to our website, I was going to talk a little bit about the networks in New Jersey, the radical Islamic networks, but it would be easier if you go to our website, scroll down, you will see a section where you can search by state the research that we've done on radical Islamic groups. Select New Jersey, and all of them will pop up. And you can just print out the profiles, and next time you're having a conversation with someone and they're saying, okay, well, the threat's overblown, this doesn't really affect me here, you just type in their zip code, look at what's around them, print out the profile, hand it to them, and they'll be forever changed. So that's something I recommend that you check out. A few different things I want to talk about today. Obviously, I want to set the stage for your viewing of Iranium. What's going on with the Iranian regime. The big development was the nuclear deal that we struck, that the Obama administration struck with the Iranian regime, where they are now getting billions of dollars to promise not to build nuclear weapons. I remember in the State of the Union address where President Obama boasted of this deal, and he talked about the things that the Iranians were giving up. And it's true. They have scaled back their program. What he didn't mention in that address is the fact that all of that is reversible. So most Americans, when they heard that announcement, they said, okay, well, the Iranians are giving up important parts of their nuclear program. That sounds like it's a good deal. But most Americans didn't understand that they can quickly rebuild that. They didn't give up anything permanently. And in fact, they're saying that they're going to continue to build centrifuges, work on their missile technology. So what the Iranians did was, in exchange for billions of dollars and in order to improve their image around the world, they froze certain parts of their nuclear program, gave up what they can regenerate later, and meanwhile worked on the other more problematic elements of the nuclear program. So if you work on a nuclear warhead, as the Iranians were doing, that's problematic in the eyes of the world because everyone knows what that's about. It's about the bomb. But if you're working on the nuclear energy program, or the so-called energy program, the centrifuges that create the enriched uranium, well, you can do that under the deal and get away with it. So what the Iranians said was, okay, this is our strategy. We'll work on some elements of the Iranian program, return to the more problematic, controversial elements later. And it's not a coincidence that some of the nuclear elements that were frozen in Iran picked up in North Korea. The Iranians and North Koreans, their nuclear programs are consistently treated by the media and by politicians as isolated, as two separate policies, two separate issues. They are one program. They share everything. North Korea doesn't have any money. Where are they getting the money for this from? They sell their weapons and the Iranians pay for it. We know that Iranian scientists are going to North Korea to work on this. So the areas that were really the flashpoints in the debate, the Iranians shut down. It made sense. One step back in order to later take two steps forward. And they're having the North Koreans work on the more problematic areas, like developing a nuclear missile, ICBM technology, and things like that. In addition to obviously getting cash from the Western world and the sanctions alleviated, what the Iranian regime wanted to do was wipe away the memories of Ahmadinejad. Because Ahmadinejad was very good for those of us that did not like the Iranian regime or were concerned about it, because he was honest. I mean, it's hard for someone to advocate on behalf of the Iranian regime when you have Ahmadinejad out there saying that 9/11 was an inside job, the Holocaust didn't happen, we want to wipe Israel off the map. That makes our job easier. So they bring in the so-called moderate, Rouhani, under whose leadership the persecution of Christians has reached unprecedented levels. And you have a new image, and that enables them to better coerce the Western world, develop allies in the region. It stabilizes the regime, because then the Iranians that wanted change buy into the notion, saying, okay, well, maybe Rouhani will be able to effect change. I don't want to overthrow the regime, deal with the anarchy that would follow. Let's give this guy a chance. So the goals were not just to get cash, but to stabilize the regime. In 2009, the Iranian people, millions of them, went into the streets to overthrow the Iranian regime. So the regime said, we don't want that to happen again. We need to stabilize ourselves, stabilize the economy, and appease the people a little bit, and so that's what they have done. One of the big dangers of the current deal is that it potentially makes Iran immune from sanctions in the future, and here's why. By weakening the sanctions and ultimately potentially lifting them entirely, which the Iranians would love, you have Western companies, particularly from Europe, getting involved in investing in Iran and making a lot of money. These companies have ties to politicians, as we all know. So what the Iranians are doing is they're enhancing their lobby in the US and Europe, because they now have companies and politicians that are linked to the companies wanting business in Iran. So after that business is invested in and Iran builds those ties, they then can act more aggressively, work on the more controversial elements of their nuclear program, such as a warhead. And the US will say, okay, it's time to go back to sanctions, but it won't work. Why? Because you need the international community, especially European countries, on your side in order to make them painful. But if you have the top European businesses and some American businesses investing with the Iranian regime, what are the chances that you're going to get those sanctions implemented? None. Because you would be essentially sanctioning the European economy at the same time as the Iranian. See, so the Iranians, just true to Persian nature, were playing chess while we were playing checkers. Very smart strategy on their end. I want to talk a little bit about ISIS, also known as ISIL or the Islamic State. It's all one group. They have gone through numerous name changes. Right now they go by the name of the Islamic State. I think we all remember when President Obama said that the Islamic State is neither Islamic nor a state, both of which are fundamentally dishonest statements, because they are Islamic. That doesn't mean that most Muslims share that interpretation of their faith, including groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and others that are also extremists. And I understand the motivation to say, okay, if we're going to go after ISIS, we don't want it to look like a war on Islam or a war on the Muslim world, because that will rally people to their side. That's true. The number one recruiting narrative for jihadists is the notion that there's a war on Islam and the West is persecuting Muslims around the world. So you don't want to reinforce that narrative. However, it is dishonest to say that the Islamic State is not the manifestation of at least an interpretation of Islam. And when you say it is not at least an interpretation of Islam, you take away the responsibility from the Muslim world to say, okay, well, how do we challenge that interpretation? It gives space for the Islamic State to say, no, we're just reacting to American foreign policy and injustices by Israel. We need to say that it's an interpretation of Islam so that other people that don't share that interpretation confront it. It is also a state because, unlike Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups, they have actually kept an infrastructure. They have specific officials that run certain things. That's why they're so successful. They give out food and they have health facilities. It is very much a state with a functioning government, and that's what makes it so problematic for us to tackle. Before we announced the strategy back in August or so, I said that there were several elements that a successful strategy needed. President Obama has adopted probably over 3/4 of what I recommended. Not because of me, but because a lot of people were saying the same thing. And so, by and large, I do think that the strategy in place is good and it is workable. There are those that are saying it's failing. It's only been in place about a month. It is premature to start talking about sending in combat forces into Iraq when the strategy has just only begun. And there are results on the ground that you're not hearing about. I noticed the first airstrikes, what happened when we struck the Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria, and ISIS. I saw panic on their social media accounts. I watched them. I like to see how they're thinking, what they're saying to each other. And it was very clear that they were worried. Normally they have coordinated responses. They didn't have it. We're seeing them stalled now in Kobani, in Syria, fighting against the Kurds. They might ultimately take it, but it is still draining a lot of their resources. ISIS has had to withdraw from parts of northern Iraq, but again because of the Kurds, and that's why they're moving south towards Baghdad. Because if they're going to lose territory, they need to make up for it elsewhere, otherwise it becomes clear to the world that they're losing. The reason ISIS is able to recruit so much is because of the perception that they're winning. This is another element that most Americans, including politicians, don't understand. The reason terrorist groups boast of their successes so much, sometimes to the point where it doesn't even make sense, isn't just about morale for their troops, for their fighters. It's because when there's a battle within the Muslim world, especially between jihadists, and they disagree over something, they say, well, here's how we know who is right. Who is Allah blessing? Who is being victorious? So when the Islamic State is out there and they're facing their critics, they have a very powerful argument because they can say, well, you may disagree with us, but obviously Allah is blessing us because we control over 1/3 of Syria, 1/3 of Iraq. What other group controls that? So it is very, very important that when this group gains territory anywhere, we have to immediately point to other problems that they're having as part of the psychological war, because otherwise there are many people that are going to interpret that as saying, okay, I didn't agree with ISIS before. I see that they're succeeding on the ground. Obviously, Allah is behind them. It's a deadly perception that we have to combat. Even though I largely support the current strategy against ISIS, there are 4 main weaknesses. The biggest one has to do with the influence of Iran. the strategy does not account for the influence of Iran. Why was ISIS able to come in, and in one battle, there were 800 ISIS terrorists fighting over 30,000 Iraqi soldiers? The Iraqis fled. Why'd that happen? The reason is because the Iraqis in the past have fought terrorist groups like ISIS and Iranian-backed militias successfully. So what changed? Here's what changed. Obviously, U.S. pulling out, big factor. But the biggest factor is that the Iraqi government got so close to Iran, and you had Iranian-backed militias on the ground, that if you're a Sunni in Iraq, your primary concern is the Shiites backed by Iran. You're not going to fight for an Iraqi government that you think is a stooge of those that want to kill you. So the Iraqi army did not feel any type of tie to the main Iraqi government because a lot of the soldiers were Sunni. So here's how that relates to today. We need Sunni tribes who are currently fighting ISIS to grow in power and succeed. But if you're a Sunni in Iraq, even if you hate the Islamic State, you are more afraid of the Iranian-backed militias that we are not confronting. The new Iraqi government just chose as its interior minister one of the top officials of an Iranian-backed militia. So if you're a Sunni in Iraq, you see that and you're going to say, I hate ISIS, but I'm not going to put my life on the line to fight them because I know at the end of the day, if I follow ISIS's strict, insane rules, I'm alive. But the Iranian-backed militias, if they come into my town, I might not be alive. So the big weakness is that we still do not have a strategy against Iran. It's aimed at accommodating Iran. And until we have a strategy that goes after those Iranian-backed militias, ISIS is going to have the fuel to recruit, and we're not going to have Iraqi boots on the ground to help fight them. The second major element is the so-called moderate Syrian rebels. I want to be clear, since I was a teenager, I did volunteer work for what you would call the Syrian rebels. There are good guys among them. I very much want to see the Assad dictatorship fall. But I also know how fragmented the Syrian opposition is. And I've studied the different Syrian rebel groups that the U.S. wants to back to kick ISIS out of Syria. Every single one of them has Islamists among them, major Islamist components, those that want to implement Sharia law. And if you want to implement Sharia law, you are fundamentally anti-American. One of the groups, which is linked to the Muslim Brotherhood that we gave anti-tank missiles to, reacted with horror over the fact that we carried out airstrikes on ISIS. So they came to us and they said, we are the enemies of ISIS, we're fighting them, please give us anti-tank missiles. Okay, here you go, thank you. We carry out airstrikes on their enemy and they start preaching anti-Americanism. That's not a real ally. And so we have to create a viable partner on the ground and not accept the Syrian opposition as it currently is. Otherwise, inevitably, you're going to have American arms and money falling into the hands of terrorists, not just ISIS, but Al-Qaeda and other groups are going to use it to implement Sharia and push an anti-American agenda. Some of that's inevitable. When you get involved in a situation like that, some supplies are going to end up in the hands of the enemy. But what I'm saying right now is that we do not have a viable peace partner on the ground that I think it is wise to work with. I believe we can get there. We're not there yet. The third error in the strategy is who we included in the international coalition. The media loves numbers. To be able to say we have 40 or 50 members of the coalition, people like that. But we need to emphasize quality over quantity. Because let's think about who we included. Turkey. We all know the direction Turkey's gone in. They're harboring Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Secular Syrians who I've talked to hate Turkish influence because they're backing the Muslim Brotherhood and groups that are only a few degrees different than ISIS. In fact, they were turning a blind eye to ISIS. I've seen videos of ISIS openly riding on subways and boasting how they're just operating in Turkey, our NATO ally, for probably well over a year now. The country of Qatar, a U.S. ally, is basically the ATM of the global jihad right now. We involved them in Libya. And the reason Libya is such a mess right now isn't really because we overthrew Gaddafi. It's because the countries we involved started financing Islamist militias like Ansar al-Sharia that killed Ambassador Chris Stevens. And they're in a civil war right now. So these allies that we bring in consistently undermine our own progress. The fourth error, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, is how President Obama talked about saying we will never send in combat troops, but we're sending in advisors. I know from this audience, we all see the game of semantics that's going on. You send in advisors, they could very well end up in combat. they're going to have guns and defend themselves. And so eventually, probably, we're going to get stuck in a situation where you're going to see Americans shooting it out with ISIS or Iraqis that don't like him or Iranian-backed militias, and then the president's going to be stuck in this position where he's going to have to say, well, I didn't send in combat troops, but yes, troops are engaged in combat. And that's going to look bad for him politically, obviously, but also internationally. It's going to make us look like we lied. Because the Muslim Brotherhood's big propaganda offensive right now is they're saying that ISIS is a creation of course, the Jews and us, and we're setting the stage in order to send in combat troops, and we're lying. And so that's a situation that's going to be very difficult. I don't want my comment to be interpreted, though, as an endorsement of sending in combat troops on the ground into Iraq right now in order to shoot it out with ISIS. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I am definitely one of the most passionate people about defeating Islamic extremists. And I believe defeating them is possible. I don't believe that it's a police action where you just kind of contain it. I want this gone. When I have kids one day, I don't want them growing up having to talk about this. But I don't think that sending in combat troops and circumstances can change is the right move right now. The reason that we've had to say we're not sending in combat troops were for a bunch of different reasons. The first and arguably the biggest is simply politics. It's unpopular. And we can moan and groan and say that the president and his allies were playing politics by not sending in combat troops into Iraq, but Congress has a big role to play in any war. They can cut off the money. And so you will have a potential political crisis if, at least right off the bat, you send in combat troops. And also getting international partners involved was necessary. It was necessary for us to say, okay, we're not sending in combat troops right now. The second reason that I think we need to think a lot more about sending in combat troops is that the Iraqis themselves don't want it. The Iraqi government is saying that they can handle this on their own. And even if that's true or not true, we have to at least give them a chance. And that also plays into the ideological war. Again, remember the narrative over there. The narrative is that the U.S. creates these problems so that we can go in and occupy countries. So if the Iraqi government is out there saying, we can handle this right now, I would love to not send American boots on the ground, put their lives at risk, and let the Iraqis take care of it, which is another reason. It's inevitable. We can't stay there forever. So the Iraqis, the Kurds, Syrians, they're all going to have to take care of this problem themselves eventually. And if we send in combat forces, we have to be careful that we're not delaying the inevitable. There's going to be a lot of learning while on the job by the Iraqis and the Kurds, and only they can do that. We can be there to help them as advisors, to give them intelligence, but this is a battle that they're going to have to win themselves. One of the other big reasons is because the Islamic State wants American troops there. Very much so. When I look at the ISIS social media accounts, the top thing that they're encouraging each other with is they're saying, don't worry. Yes, we're being bombed and there's nothing we can do about it. But sooner or later, there's going to be American boots on the ground. And that's when you can all get your glory. Because there's nothing more glorious to a jihadist than to being able to say that you kidnapped, injured, or even carried out a failed attack on American soldiers. They love those videos and those photos. And so the Islamic State is saying, okay, even if we lose 1,000 terrorists, but if we kill one American soldier, that will play out in the Muslim world as a sense of victory. Right now, they can't spin air raids. They can't say, okay, well, we're getting bombed, but trust us, we won that battle. No, you didn't shoot down any planes. Nobody believes it. In fact, I've seen ISIS members claim they've shot down planes, and other ISIS members said, no, we didn't. That didn't happen. So be aware that, yes, American troops on the ground may become necessary, but recognize ISIS very much wants that. And finally, everything is a cost-benefit analysis. There are a lot of options that we can embrace in order to maximize our chances in the fight against Islamic extremism, but there's costs. And no one understands the cost-benefit ratio better than American soldiers. And it's not just about being killed. It's also about those that are injured, those that come back seeing things that keep them up late at night. What about the cost of them not seeing their kids grow up? There's a lot of costs that go along with this beyond what the media talks about when they talk about numbers of those that are killed. And so we have to treat this with the utmost seriousness. And there was a poll showing that the majority of American soldiers do not want a sizable American presence in Iraq to engage ISIS in battle or even to advise the Iraqi government. They're willing to have a small amount, but they don't want to go overboard. And so based on that analysis, I would say for now, and circumstances can very quickly change, I think it's wise for us to not send in combat forces. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I'm seeing that becoming the debate right now in the news. Increasingly, that's where it's framing around. And so I want everyone to understand all the different factors at play. One more element that I want to discuss is the Muslim American community. The Muslim American community has done a good job, they deserve credit, of responding to ISIS. Virtually every leader has condemned them. Here's the problem, though. The top leaders issued a letter, a much-needed letter, with theological rebuttals to ISIS, saying these different tactics are wrong and here's why. And I read the letter, and I was thinking, this sounds good, but then I came across a few very problematic things. They said that the objective of resurrecting the caliphate is right. They said that implementing Sharia, specifically what's called the hudud punishments, the most vicious elements of Sharia law, are mandated by their scriptures. So this letter that went around the media, that the media was saying, okay, this proves that the Muslim American community has condemned ISIS in full, and these are moderates, actually endorsed the pillars of the ISIS ideology. And it was leaders of groups like the Council on American-Islamic Relations, the Islamic Circle of North America, the Islamic Society of North America, the most powerful Muslim American organizations in the U.S. And I haven't seen anyone in the media point that out. That's not enough to condemn tactics. You have to condemn the ideology and the goals, and we're not there yet. And so that has to be part of the conversation. I'm just about to wrap up, but without going through all the specific numbers, I have the numbers here if you want to talk about during the Q&A. The Muslim American community, your average Muslim American, yes, is moderate. The data shows that. I have great Muslim American sources that have pointed out incredible information to me. But the top leadership that you're seeing on TV and holding the big conventions, they are very much sheep's and wolf's clothing, and they may condemn Al-Qaeda, 9/11, and ISIS, but then on the other hand, you'll see them supporting Hamas, Sharia law, spreading anti-American propaganda. So there is a gap between the average Muslim American community and what they believe, and then the leadership with the money and the resources that purports to represent them. And so with that, I'm passing around, I believe it passed around the newsletter so we can keep in contact, and I'm happy to take some Q&A, and thanks everyone for coming out.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that lecture from Ryan Mauro as much as I did. He brought some keen insight and certainly some information on what we don't hear on the news outlets. He is a frequent contributor on Fox News, so you may see him in the comfort of your home on other occasions, and we hope you tune in. Our thanks to Ryan from our group, New Jersey Tea Party Coalition. Please tune in to our website at your leisure, NJTeaPartyCoalition.org, and we look forward to seeing you on our Facebook page and one of our Twitter followers. Thank you.